Welcome to the Anam Cara podcast with me, Simon North. And today I'm delighted to say my guest is Scott Grace, who's joining us from Mexico City. So I think it's midday there. So good afternoon, Scott. Thank you for joining me.
Buenas tardes.
So we're here to discuss the subject of father wounds, which is still something I would like to really get to the bottom of, and particularly towards the end of the podcast, I would really love to get into the whole question of getting over the feeling of anger that father wounds can cause, and how we can forgive, as that's really the process of getting to healing. But before we get there, we're going to have to go through what father wounds are and how we can identify them. So, Scott, if you'd like to, voice your views on that, how can we identify our father wounds?
Well, wounding is recognizing that you have an owie, that you're not a happy camper, that there's some hole where it would have been nice to be filled in childhood. And I would say a father wound has to do with an identity where you feel like you need to do something, prove something, fix something, or change something before you can be worthy of love, before you can be receptive to other people's love, or before you can be proud of yourself. See, a father's masculine love is proud and encourages a young boy or girl to take risks and the ideal fathering is like, hey, it's okay, you fell, I'll help you get up and let's keep moving. There's no criticism, there's just encouragement. And when a father, because of his father, tries to coach you and encourage you through shame, guilt, criticism, or just rejecting you, then it just creates this hole in your soul. And you walk around without a sense of who you are, how valuable and lovable and capable you are, and what you can and cannot do. Your mothering, it says who you are is so precious. Your fathering ideally would be what you can do is amazing. And it creates a container where it's safe to take risks and try new things and move into the world with a sense of adventure. That's the ideal. So if you have anything less than that, you might call it your father wound. I don't like labels like that, and especially I don't like pointing the finger at one person, because I think our whole culture has a father wound and very warped ideas about masculinity, and it's everywhere. It's not just one person that wounds us.
Okay, we'll get into that in a moment, I think. But could we just cover for the audience who are listening, who so they can maybe feel into their own situation, and what are the core issues that could come up if you have a father wound?
Self-doubt, uh, addictions, addiction to your comfort zone, whether that be a substance or a couch, becoming a couch potato, or being a workaholic. The other extreme of a father wound is I am not going to rest long enough that to feel my pain. I'm just going to keep working hard for the money or the approval or the prestige, but I'm on a hamster wheel, and the number one rule is don't stop. Don't stop the movement, because that movement's keeping me away from my feelings, and it keeps me in this artificial membrane where I think I'm enough because I'm overcompensating for this underlying pain. I think that's actually more prevalent than the couch potato wound, acting out of the wound,
And
especially nowadays.
and so when you sort of feel those things are present for you, how could you relate that to your experience growing up with your father? kind of behaviors in your family world would have happened for you to have a father wound?
Well, I'll speak for myself. I was the apple of my father's eye. He was my knight in shining armor up until a little prepubescent, around 13, 14, when I started to explore things that he didn't approve of, that scared him and threatened him. So some of those things were spirituality, drugs, just things that were calling me to walk in a different path than his. And he expressed his fear through anger and through disapproval and criticism and punishment. And the more he tried to control me, the more I rebelled, and there just became this huge wall between us. And I remember very vividly how it felt when he would use the word lazy. You are lazy. You're good for nothing, he would say. And that became even though I pushed against that and I pretended it didn't affect me, it became the foundation of my inner critic's biggest judgment of myself. I'm looking for evidence that I'm lazy, and I'm trying to overcompensate so that I don't have to feel this shame that comes up around the word lazy or selfish. So basically, my father was really upset, and he went into a cocoon of protection. He actually started to just say, I don't care anymore. It was like we were living under the same roof, but we weren't connecting at all. So his defense was apathy. And I took it very personally. I was very wounded, even though my defense against defense was apathy as well. I don't care. I don't care about you. You don't care about me.
Mm.
So that's where we started. That's where we started. Now, uh, over decades, lots of therapy, lots of grief work, lots of letters back and forth. We repaired the damage and became very close.
Hmm. Let's just pick up on grief there for a moment. That's interesting because grief gives us lots of feelings, and as a young man, they're feelings that you might not understand. You are grieving in the moment for the father that's not there for you, or the father you want isn't present. And yeah, did you feel that going on in your relationship? Were you aware of it?
I was aware of anger. It took a long time before I recognized that the anger was a protective band-aid covering up grief. And I got to that grief, or grief, that grief got to me through relationship breakups, disappointments. I got down on my knees because life didn't go the way I wanted it. And it broke me. It broke me open. And I went back to my father and told him how much he hurt me. I actually told him in anger, "You failed me as a father." And he had the wherewithal to just listen. That
Mm.
was very brave of him.
Mm. I,
Yeah.
I'm interested now in exploring a little bit with you how father wounds affected you, because I know it affected me, and how that showed up in my relationships with my intimate relationships. But then I have a son, and I'm partly doing this little exploration of father wounds because I'm concerned about whether or not I wounded him. So, yeah, what's your take on
Yeah.
that?
Well, you can relax about that, Simon. You did wound him. The debate is
Thanks.
over.
Thanks.
Even if you actually did not uh, wound him at all, then he might end up on a therapist's couch saying, "I I can't live up to my father. He was such a good father, and I'm not going to be anywhere near as good a father. If I have a son, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. So you can rest and relax and know that on some level you wounded him, and that's part of your job description to show him that there is something called humanity here, where we slip in and out of our best self. And hopefully, the best we can do is be aware when we've uh, wounded someone and apologize and listen to their feelings about it if feelings are around. That's the best you can do. You can't be a perfect parent.
Well,
But you had a quote.
this is great
Go
stuff.
ahead.
Because all I've got to do is now, when we've finished, I just need to send him this podcast with a message saying, Scott sorted it out, and I'm sorry. Here it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have to do any talking to your son. Just play him the movie here.
Yeah. Well, I have talked to him
Yeah.
about it, and of course his reaction to that conversation was wonderful actually, because he did have give me some honesty about it, which he always does. But he sort of reassured me that I hadn't really wounded him. But of course, it rather
How
depends on
old is he?
definition. He'll be he's 27, so he'll be
Hmm.
28 this year. And yeah, he had a very mature reaction to this discussion. I would like to discuss it with him
Hmm.
when that's appropriate.
Hmm.
Um,
Mhm.
yeah. Um, have you experienced something like that in your family?
I've had a few conversations with my daughter, like the one that you had with your son. And I realized that, first of all, she's like, Dad, I'm fine. We're fine. Let me tell you about my week. That's about where she's at right now. So I realized I was being self-indulgent and not really connecting with her, like trying to purge myself of some possible guilt about how I may have possibly wounded her, when really the story hasn't been told yet. And if it's not a problem in her world, why bring it up? That's where I arrived at.
Hmm.
But there is a nice thing, I think, to be able to say to a child, I know I'm not perfect, and then maybe I may have had an impact on you. And I want you to know that anytime you want to have a conversation about my blind spots and the mistakes that I made and how it affected you, I'll listen and I will apologize and I will respect your point of view, to leave the door open.
Hmm.
And because everybody has this trying to be perfect thing. And if they can see our parents being compassionately imperfect, compassionate with themselves when they make mistakes, compassionate with it's so much safer to be alive around people who know they're doing their best and know that their best isn't always enough.
I think this is so useful. It's so useful for me listening to it, but also I'm sure for the audience to have that kind of ability to be honest in a conversation with a child or a loved one about this, you know, subject. I really think that's fantastic. Actually, that's great advice. Yeah. Um, thank you. Um,
Mm,
and going on from that, because I'm really keen that this podcast is listened to by men and women. And you mentioned your relationship
mm,
with your daughter, and of course, I have a daughter as well, and I haven't yet had the conversation with her about this subject, and so I've got that yet to come. Um, and and I won't just send her the podcast, I promise. I will have the conversation, but yes, it's perhaps not as obvious that in that relationship between father and daughter, rather depends what that relationship's like. But do you feel it's got a bit more? there's a bit more something in the father-son relationship which is wounding rather than the father-daughter. Is that true or not?
That is a subject I'm not an expert on. It's generalizing around these kinds of things is not one of my favorite things to do. I think we all need love and safety and support, and some people get it from a single parent, and they get enough of it, and they go out in the world. One thing that I've noticed about this generation, the ones you and I have given birth to, is they seem to be looking more towards the future rather than I want to work on my relationship with my father or my mother. It's more like, God damn, it's a really weird world out there, and I want to give my gifts and find my place. And my eyes are looking towards the future. And I've learned to respect that about my daughter. She has no interest in going into the museum of modern history between us.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. I will go away and think about that before bringing bringing this up with my own daughter.
Reread the poem by Gibran about parenting. Your children are not your children; they are life's longing for itself. There's a beautiful line in that about the future, about like you can give them. Uh, they can give you their thoughts, but you can't give them yours because their thoughts dwell in the house of tomorrow, a place you can't visit, even in your dreams.
Mm.
If you are successful at parenting, whatever the hell that means, you launch your children and they go out into the future and they go into worlds that you can't and you shouldn't be able to visit. You know, they are dwelling in the house of tomorrow. So I just like I have a friend whose son doesn't talk to her, and she was judging herself for a long time, and recently she just realized I launched him well. He's out in the world doing his thing. This is the purpose.
Mm.
All the not to like create a best friend. I mean, if that happens, it's icing on the cake. But to launch them out of your world into their world as a creator.
Well, this has morphed into a wonderful conversation and podcast about parenting.
I
But
know, and I have a song. I have a song to highlight this.
go on then. I think
All right.
I think you're itching to do it, so I'm going to give
Yeah.
I'm going to give you the floor, as they say, which is a bit of a weird metaphor. But here you go.
So when I was 24, I was doing these retreats at a place called Shalom Mountain in Upper New York, and they had one called Mother, Son, Father, Daughter, where parents would come with their children and work on their mother wounds for 5 days. And my mother said yes when I asked her. And the facilitators really rocked our world because we thought we were going to get closer. And they made it clear that before we could even have a chance of getting closer, that we needed to separate, that we were enmeshed, we hadn't individuated. And well, I felt it in every core, every cell of my body. And I went home and wrote this song. And it's me singing to my mother, and then my mother singing to me, and then but here it is. It's everything we've been talking about so far, Simon. Oh, take delight in my awkward flight. Don't ponder the how or the why. Leaving the nest to discover my best. Don't squeeze on my hand as I fly. Let go and wave, child, goodbye. Bye bye. Oh, take delight in my awkward flight. Your love and your fears weigh a ton. The distance I choose is no verdict on you. Don't battle what needs to be done. A man needs to grow from a son. Son, I nursed you and rocked you and answered your cries. I looked out at life through your innocent eyes. Now you're turning away, and it's so hard to bear. I gave you my all. There's a piece of me in there. Oh, take delight in my awkward flight. Let's cut away old worn out strings. Came through your home to discover my own. Please don't let my spaciousness sting. Take joy that I'm finding my way, my way. Take delight in my upward flight. Don't pull on the reins tightly so. I'd much rather soar from your heart's open door. Oh, mother, it's time to let go. Oh, mother, it's time to let go. Son, I never dreamed this could be part of the plan. Part of me wanted to always hold your hand. It's sad, but it's good, and my heart understands. Goodbye to my son is hello to a man. Perhaps we'll be buddies, perhaps we'll be friends. Who knows where we'll land when we touch down again? But for now, we must fly in our own separate skies, trusting our love as we say our goodbyes. Trusting in love as we say goodbye.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to hear and yeah, connect within those words. Brilliant. Thank you so much. I've never had a song sung on my podcast before. I loved it. And just noticed some of the, the sound quality there might might be a problem. So I'll put a link in the show notes so people can actually listen or download the song themselves. So
Oh, okay, sure. I'll send you that.
yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Scott.
Mhm.
Yeah, going on from the song and the subject of the song and our conversation. I'd love to just talk to you about masculinity and what it means for young men and women today. It's really interesting about what you said about looking backwards or looking forwards. But yeah, generally, I'd love to know your feelings around that.
My feelings about just the whole conversation about masculinity.
Yeah, and I think particularly for young men and women who are going to be listening to
Okay.
this, or their parents might
Okay.
be listening and ask them to listen to it.
hmm Well, I did write a book on the subject, Mindful Masculinity, a book for men and the women who love them. And I would say that a big purpose of the book is to open your eyes and wash the blackboard, wash the slate clean of all the crazy ideas we have about men and masculinity and toxic masculinity and what is non-toxic masculinity. We can't even begin to have that conversation until we recognize what toxic masculinity is and how it is born and how our societies help us close our eyes to real strength, real courage, and develop these substitutes. Macho is a substitute. So what we're going to do is paint a picture here for a young man or a young woman. What is masculine energy? Not the masculine with a M-A-S-K, not what our society teaches us men should be like. I was called a sissy in the classroom, bullied, and all kinds of things when I exhibited any traits that seemed to be feminine. So I grew up with a certain shame around my masculinity. I'm not enough as a man. I must overcompensate. I must become a jock. I got really good at certain sports. I love sports. I still play tennis, but the energy of competition, of having to prove myself, was constantly in the background. So, and underneath that is insecurity, and insecurity is fear. So I grew up afraid. And on top of that, I grew up afraid to admit that I'm afraid. There's a chapter in the book called Men's Addiction to Not Being Afraid, to not feeling fear, not admitting it, not owning it. And once you push it down, you can't deal with it. And then you can't really become a man, because a man is someone who has faced his fears. If you look at indigenous cultures that have some wisdom about life, they all have some kind of ritual or initiation where boys go into the forest and they face their fears and they come out and they are treated as an adult from that point on. So that is lacking in our culture. We don't have initiations. We have substitutes like joining a gang, robbing a store. There's ways in which we try going to war. We try to initiate our boys into men by having them face their fears on the battlefield. And what's happening now is that, evolutionary speaking, we're not going to survive a lot longer on the planet unless we change the way we raise men, and the way that we look at masculinity. So what a lot of people are doing is that we're finding other ways to initiate young men or older men that involve facing our fears on the battlefield inside. The battle between, let's say, narcissism and a desire to make the world a better place. The battle between the part of you that would rather beat yourself up than love yourself, than accept who you are. And it's just, these are the battles that need to be fought. And I took a course called the New Warrior Training Adventure in 1996, which really was this initiation weekend. And it initiated me into feeling excited about facing my fears.
Mm.
And that's I pretty much worshiped my comfort zone. And I was a little slippery, little lying, kind of thievery guy. I was very manipulative, and it all blew up in my face in my relationships with women. And this weekend, where I got really honest with myself about my shadow.
So
Yeah.
that's interesting because my next question was about healing father wounds, but I think that whole thing around initiation Now I'm aware of that, perhaps because of my lens, my male lens. I'm aware of men's groups, and I'm aware of work as you've just described, where a young man or even a middle-aged man can go through an initiation. I'm not so clear on whether that exists for women, actually. Um, I know there are women's groups and there are women's discussion groups, but I'm not sure about it. I don't know if that initiation happens. But I'm also not clear on how a father initiates a daughter, actually. Yeah. Can you shed any light on that?
Yes. First of all, there are plenty of women's initiations. The New Warrior has a sisterhood called the Wise Woman Within. So that exists, and I'm sure there's hundreds upon hundreds of groups like it. Um, how do women get initiated? Well, in my book, I write about how feminine energy is strengthened by nurturing, by kindness, by birthing life is an initiation for many a young woman, and they hunger for it. They're like, I'm not going to feel like an adult until I am responsible for a little one and go through the birthing process. And of course, there's many women who don't feel called to be parents, so that's not for everyone. But there is some cycle in which a woman starts to a young lady starts to feel more like a woman. Maybe it involves facing challenges, which is more of a masculine thing. Masculinity grows and matures by facing challenges head on. Adversity grows a masculine side. What grows a feminine side? A sense of safety, a sense of not being alone, community, connection, softness, gentleness, nurturing. That's how the feminine side of us can grow in men and women.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And I'd like to now take the conversation beautifully, seamlessly from there into, how can we move out of the initial sadness, anger, grief part of dealing with father wounds into forgiveness, which is ultimately the place of healing. Uh,
Mm,
Perhaps you could touch
mm,
on your own story about how
mm,
you did that.
mhm, mhm. Well, I was lucky enough to have a father who had done some therapy and who recognized that when I visited him and I started screaming at him and letting him have it, you failed me as a father. I hate you. That he recognized it as a healing opportunity. So he just listened. He let me vent. And and he said something like, I'm glad you got that off your chest. Now, that is ideal. The vast majority of the people who are listening are probably going to say, well, my father wouldn't just listen to that. So let's dial it back and speak to people, whether your father is alive or dead. How do you go from, first of all, if you're sad and angry, you don't move out of it. To move out of it, you move into it. You turn up the volume and you go deeper into, wow, I am really wounded. I'm really hurting. Let me give myself some love and some attention. Let me get some attention from elders and maybe a life coach or a therapist. Let me go into this, because the goal, if the goal is getting past it, getting over it, you're re-traumatizing yourself by not allowing your wound to breathe. It needs to breathe. There's layers upon layers, and you have to validate that it's okay for me to be where I'm at. And then it shifts because emotions are constantly changing. So once you validate an emotion, it's already shifting. And for me, underneath anger was sadness. Some people, underneath sadness is their anger. And it's in my household, it was taboo to feel angry. So I went straight to sadness because it was safe and I used to get a lot of love and attention for it. But I was shamed and punished and even hit if I expressed anger. So anger was the hardest thing for me to deal with.
Hmm. Okay. Thank you. That's very insightful. Now, there are obviously lots of ways people can get help, but I would like to give you the opportunity just to talk about the offerings that you have, and the links will go in the show notes. And so, if people have listened this far into the
Mm,
podcast, I feel like they deserve at least a way to start exploring healing this. So what is it
mhm,
that
mhm.
that Scott Grace offers the world?
I I know a lot of people in my field with books and all that. They create these online courses, which is great in the sense that you can reach a lot of people and you can create passive income. I think I'm more into passive aggressive income. Um, and I just said that because it came to my mind. It seemed rather playful, but I love working one on one with people. I get to know people. I love building trust. I'm a really great listener, and I can connect with people. As I did in that song, I wrote that song about my mother. I wrote half of it. It was my half of the song. And I played it for my therapist, and my therapist said, now express your mother's feelings. This song is halfway done. Go home and write what your mother's heart would write. And it was very healing for me to go there. And I put myself in her moccasins, her high heels, and I can feel her heart. Even when I'm in my pain, if I take the time, I can really feel a person's heart. So that's what I do in my private practice. I put myself in the psyche, the heart, the pain of a person. And somehow I've been given the gift of being able to feel more deeply into the psyche, into the shadowland of my client than my client is capable of being aware of in themselves. So I create a lot of safety. I give guidance. I become sometimes their parent, and I gradually teach people how to parent themselves. Because ultimately, if you want to forgive your father, you got to become the loving, encouraging father that fills the wound with its opposite. Otherwise, it's very convenient to blame and continue the blame game. But at some point, you have to say, okay, enough of the blame. How do I reinvent myself? If a wound is simply a hole, do I want to keep filling it with blame or do I want to start filling it with the loving, kind inner voice that I wish my father would have had towards me? And that reparenting of your inner child or even of your adult is not easy. And if you can afford to have some support, to have somebody jumpstart and get you going, it's been invaluable for me. I've tried to look at how much money I've spent on my personal growth therapy and otherwise, and it's close to $1 million. It's like if I had a dollar for every dollar I've spent on personal growth, I'd be a millionaire.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. That's fantastic, and I will obviously put links in the show notes and push that when this podcast goes out to be published. So, Scott, thank you so much for your time and the conversation. I really think we rinsed the subject well and wrung it out.
Mm.
Um, but I'm going to give you one last challenge, and that is to play us out with a song or a poem, your choice.
Mhm.
Could you possibly do it a cappella? Because I know through
Yes, yes,
Medium
yes.
Bloom, it's not
I
working too well to hear the guitar.
Yeah. I forgot to press the musician on thing, but let's do it a cappella. So, uh, what I want to make this very clear that this is going to come through me in the moment, and the way to make it very clear is for you, Simon North, to give me the first line in the poem.
Okay. Um, right. The first line in the poem is, "Oh, my father, I wish I'd had the time to talk to you."
Oh, my father, I wish I had the time to talk to you, to see my life through your points of view, to know that you've walked your own battlefield, and to just be able to chat and get real. Your battlefield's been different than mine. I have an opportunity to be kind, but the way you and your generation was designed, it was like you had to spend 24/7 in your mind. And that wounded me, I will not lie. But I'm also a pretty great guy. And you had a part in that playing out. So I take responsibility for my pain and doubt. I'm not going to try to figure this all out and pin it on you. I want to see life through your points of view. How is it for you to be in the war? And I'm not just talking about an actual war, I'm talking about your childhood and being squeezed into a box. Because every generation, the box has gotten larger, and I have a lot more room to wiggle and make mistakes. And you, man, you had the brakes. You had the brakes put on your car. You had a foot on the accelerator and a foot on the brake, and it wasn't really cool to make a few mistakes. And I want to know what that was like for you. I want to listen to your point of view. I want to see it through your eyes and feel like in love I can rise. Because once we trade our points of view and you become me and I become you, and we can go back to our respective places and honor and respect each other with graces. So we can do that whether alive or dead. I can do it in the privacy of my head. And I'd rather do that than continue to take meds. Empathy, it's the best drug of all. Empathy, it tears down the walls. I don't need you to even be here in your body to listen to me. It all happens up here and here. It's empathy. And that's what heals the world one heart at a time. And I'm going to say goodbye because going further would be way out of line. Time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Scott. I really, really appreciate it.
Anytime.
Wonderful.
Anytime.
Take care on your journey.
Thank you, my friend.